Okay, so welcome back to my channel. I am Jason, and this is from Sin's Perspective Reviews. So, we have reached the final story in Season 1 of Queens of Mystery, Smoke and Mirrors. So, if you are interested in hearing my recap and seeing how I created this look, please stay tuned. Okay, so like with the first two stories, it opens with introducing you basically to the characters, and of course eventually a body is slipped in and Matilda has to come in. So, Smoke and Mirrors. Okay, so there is this gentleman by the name of Sir Lawrence, and he is a legend in theater and movies, and so he has purchased the rights to one of Jane's books, and he has decided to adapt it to a play. And so the play is taking place in the Corn Exchange Theater. It's been around since 1894, and so they're now having their dress rehearsal. So the actors on stage for the dress rehearsal is, of course, Sir Lawrence, Dame Blanche, Amy, and Ian. So Sir Lawrence plays a detective who's investigating some weird murders or whatever occurrences, whatever the case may be. So it's an older theater, like I said, and so they've had some issues, namely some electrical issues, right? So during this rehearsal, there was like a power surge of some sort, and it caused some of the light bulbs to explode, and it was a situation. So of course Amy, she's the lead actress, she's a younger woman, and it's freaked her out, and so she started screaming, and oh my god, that almost scared me to death, the whole thing. And so instead of being understanding, like, okay, well, yeah, these bulbs did just explode over her head, he says to her, why do you always overreact, you stupid girl? And if looks could kill, Sir Lawrence would have been 10 toes to the sky, because she looked like she wanted to throttle him, for real. Like, how dare you talk to me like that? So Ursula was like, okay, just take 5. Ursula is the director, and she asked Fiona. Fiona is the stage manager, so she does a lot of the behind the scenes, the music, the lighting, curtains, that whole thing. So she asked Fiona to go and take a look at the lighting, and she told them to take a 5-minute break. So Jane and Beth, they're in the audience, and they started talking about the play, and of course Jane is nervous, and she was like, this play has had an unusual amount of mishaps. And it was like, do you think it's because of the play that shall not be named? People feel like in the theater world feel like it's bad luck to name, and I think it's Macbeth is in the title, and so of course that's said to be taboo. You never say that in the theater, and of course all these old wives' tales, and they're like, Kat of course doesn't believe that, but they did acknowledge that, okay, there's been a lot of goings on. And then you look up in the balcony, and then you see Quentin. Quentin is a reviewer, and so he's there writing a story on the play. And they were like, I wonder what he's writing, basically the review, what he's writing so far, because he's never written about them or even given their books, because again, they're all authors. He's never written anything about them or anything positive anyway. And so while this is going on, you can hear all this carrying on going on in the background, and then you realize it's Sir Lawrence and Amy. They getting into it on stage. Obviously, he just called her a stupid girl and the whole thing, and then he says to her, she was like, well, I'm sorry, I'm doing the best that I can as far as the acting. And he was like, trying is not the same thing as doing. And so, of course, she felt some kind of way. And he basically, left, said he was going to his dressing room or whatever the case may be. He had enough. So, the sisters, Beth was like, didn't you have Kat was saying to Beth, didn't you have a crush on him? You know, maybe, you know, it's time for you to get back out there. And of course Beth took offense to that, and she basically told her to mind her business or whatever the case may be, and she got up and she walked out. And Kat was like, well, what was that about? And so Jane had to tell her, you know, it's the 3rd anniversary of her husband's passing. So Kat, that completely slipped her mind. And so she's like, oh, okay. So Beth is like, I ain't looking for no love connection with nobody. Mind your business. Mind your business, right? So she got up and she basically stormed out. This is Beth. So Matilda's at the station. Terry is bringing in boxes and boxes of records. And Inspector Thorne comes in and says, I need you to archive these files, and I need you to compare them to what's in the database. I guess just to make sure that, you know, before they, I guess, you know, a lot of people, they're transferring over to paper, electronic, and so I guess you want to make sure that everything they have is in the files is in the system. And he basically said that, you know, police work is not all, you know, a lot of it is paperwork. And so he was like, he had some place to be, and, you know, if there's a problem, try not to get, you know, basically get into any shit while I'm gone. So they're now in the kitchen during the break, and you see Quentin and Dame Blanche, they're off to the side talking, you know, talking amongst themselves. And Fiona, the stage manager, she walks in, and Beth says to her, you know, you should probably limit your intake to, I guess it was sugar or what, caffeine, to a certain amount a day. And Fiona was like, well, what are you talking about? Why would I do that? She was like, well, it's, you know, it's important to do that in your first trimester. And Fiona was like, girl, I'm not pregnant. You can, you know, I'm trying to figure out how she even thought that Fiona was pregnant. It wasn't like she was showing her anything like that. But the narrator was like, okay, she, you know, Beth has over 20 years experience as a midwife, and then her husband was a doctor, and so she could just tell these things. Okay, I guess. And so Fiona left, and Kat came in, and she apologized for being insensitive. And of course it was, you know, it blew over. And, you know, they started talking about all the mishaps or whatever of the play, and how, you know, it's been one thing, it seemed like it's been one thing after another with this play and the Macbeth and da. And then eventually Jane walks in, and she says that Kenneth, who owns the theater, told her that the ticket sales were good, and, you know, a lot of the tickets, you know, people bought tickets because of Sir Lawrence and Dame Blanche, because, you know, they love to see them together on stage. They always had great chemistry. They, you know, they're revered. You know, people want to see them. They're the two that's selling the tickets. They're getting the people in the seats. And then you find out that Sir Lawrence and Dame Blanche was actually married at one point. Actually, they got married, divorced, and they remarried, and apparently got divorced again. So we find that out. So now Beth and Kat, they're like, so I wonder what that little weasel basically Quentin wrote in his little purple book. Now you find throughout this episode that Quentin has a thing for purple. He has a purple blazer. His notebook that he writes in is purple. He's purple. And so they agreed that, because at this point he was still standing over talking to Dame Blanche. So Kat went over to distract him, while Beth went to find his book to see, you know, the notes, to see what, you know, the story was going to be once it came out. And so and she found the book. The book was left in the balcony where he was sitting. So she went, and she agreed to meet Kat later at the bar after she was able to look at the book. So she gets to the bar, and Kat saw Quentin, Kenneth, who owns the theater, and another man, and they gave Quentin this envelope which clearly looked like a stack of money. And so Beth arrived, and she basically said that, you know, it doesn't seem like Jane has anything to worry about, that it seemed like he is writing good things about the play. And so of course Kat ends up telling her about the envelope and the sketchy guy, and how the guy that they were talking to looked familiar, but of course they, you know, she couldn't remember offhand like where she had seen him before. And so, back at the theater, Ursula, who's the manager, the director, is talking to her sister Zoe. Zoe is emotional, and something has happened. We don't, at this point, we don't know what happened. It's just, you know, Zoe's upset. She's young. She's like 18, and I'm sorry. These brushes, some of these are really old, so I need to. Some of the hairs are coming out. She's upset, clearly upset, and Ursula's talking to her. And eventually Jane walks in and says, Sir Lawrence wants to talk to you. So Zoe runs off, and Ursula is pissed off, so she now goes to see what Sir Lawrence wants, okay? So, back at the station, Matilda, going through the records to archive them and make sure they were in the system, of course, she came across her mother's file. And of course, I guess regulations would dictate that she would not have access to that information. And so she opened the folder, and of course it was empty. So now she's kind of like, okay, well, why is this file empty? Okay. And so she ends up calling her aunt Jane. Jane is distracted. She got in her own head, so she wasn't even thinking. So when Matilda called, when Matilda called and asked about the officer that investigated the case, it was the person's name, and she told her Inspector Bryant. And then of course she went to ask her, like, okay, well, why? But he died, a long time ago. Why do you want to know? And she was like, oh, no reason. So, but it was too late. She realized, oh, maybe I shouldn't have told her that, but it was too late. So Matilda hung up, and next she could hear Jane can hear arguing in the hall. So she goes out to see what in the world is going on out here. And so you see Amy and Ian, they're standing outside of Sir Lawrence's dressing room, and Ursula is in there tearing him a new one, talking about, I can't believe you did this, and she's only 18. And it's like, okay, so something happened with Sir Lawrence and Zoe, and Ursula is going in. Like, what did you do to my sister? Da, 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 da. And so she said what she needed to say, and as she was walking out, Amy and Ian, of course, they did the whole thing where they're trying to run away, right? And so Jane is standing out. I mean, Ursula came out in time to see Amy and Ian hit the door, but she also saw Jane in the hallway. So now she's like, okay, they were listening to the conversation, but she was too pissed. She didn't care. So that we had that going on. So Fiona, you see Fiona in the kitchen. You see Fiona dumped something in the sink, and then it was a medicine bottle, and as she was throwing it in the trash, a pill fell on the floor. So you can see her trying to take the label off. She threw it away, and just as Jane walked in, and so of course Jane's asking her if she's okay, and of course she's like, oh, I'm fine, and she walked out. So now it's the second rehearsal. Dame Blanche, Amy, Sir Lawrence, and Ian are back on stage, and Sir Lawrence makes his entrance. He says his lines, and then Amy draws a blank. You can kind of see her eyes are kind of glazed over, and they end up having to tell her lunch. She forgot the lines, and so he ends up going in on her again. How you're the worst actor I've ever worked with, and then she's like, well, if I'm so bad, then why did you give me the part? And then he says, well, your uncle said the only way that he would back the play is if I gave you the part. So now Amy is humiliated, and she runs off stage. So Ian is like, you didn't have to do that. And so Ian, so he ends up telling Ian, if you don't like, how things are going here, then you could always go somewhere else, do something else with yourself. So he didn't really press the issue too hard, and he ends up going after Amy. And the whole time when all these things are going on, you just see Dame Blanche. She's just standing there. She just doesn't get involved. She's just standing there on stage on her mark, like, okay, oh boy, look at that. So she's just unmoved, right? So Jane, Beth, and Kat, they're back in the kitchen in the theater, and she's telling them that she, was distracted and ended up giving Matilda more information than she had anticipated. And so now they're like, but you know, she was like, well, he died a long time ago, so what harm could it do? So Fiona walks in. This is the stage manager, and she went to get tea. I think she was drinking coffee the first time. She's getting tea this time. And so while they were talking, you saw Dame Blanche call her over and said, I wanted to discuss my lighting, and you know, do you have time? And of course, she obliged, and so she ended up going over to talk to Dame Blanche about the lighting. So now back at the station, Matilda's on a hunt for this evidence. Of course, her mother's folder is empty, and now she's trying to figure out, like, okay, what has happened to, I guess, this information. So she ends up finding a box, and when she opened the box, there was her mother's disappearance. They found 3 pieces of evidence. It was like some kind of note, a cigarette, and a single black feather. And the only thing in the box was a single black feather. And so, of course, she's like, okay, well, what in the world does this mean? So now we at rehearsal number 4. Rehearsal number 4. So, of course, Amy Sir Lawrence and Dame Blanche is on stage. And so this time, you know, they're going through the scene. They're going through the lines. And this time there was this enormous amount of smoke, so they had a smoke machine to make the scene more dramatic, but it was like an overabundance of smoke. It was so smoky, like some of the, you know, the actors, it was like you could barely see them. So of course Amy is coughing, she's trying to say her lines, she's coughing, she's hacking, and you know, eventually, you know, Ursula's calling for Fiona to try to figure out what's going on with the smoke machine, to cut the smoke, and eventually Sir Lawrence pushed her out the way. Basically, he was like, I'm just sick of you. He literally pushed her out the way, stepped forward, and started saying his lines and her lines too, and ad-libbing. So the next thing you know, you hear this noise, and this huge bag comes down and flattens Sir Lawrence. So now Matilda's at the station because Sir Lawrence is now dead under this bag. Is now dead, like I said, dead under this bag, and they realized that the rope was intentionally cut. So this was not an accident, it was murder. So now she starts interviewing the people and trying to find out where they were. And of course, at the end of every interview, when she asked the question, well, did he have an issue with anyone? They said, well, he did get into an argument with somebody. Everybody's saying this, and of course, they named Ursula. So while she's doing the interview, Terry is going around. He's going all through the backstage trying to find this, whatever this thing was that they used to cut the rope. And while he's looking, you saw Beth, Jane, and Kat. You know, they want to get backstage so they can do some investigation of their own. So his mother ends up calling him. Terry's mother ends up calling him, asking him what he want for tea, and you know, if he was dressed warm enough, and you know, he's talking about his long johns or whatever he's wearing, how the other ones that the aunt, no, grandmother gave him was itchy, and I mean, it's like, Lord, this is a grown ass man, okay, girl, why are you worried about his undergarments? Anywho, so he ends up taking the call. He ends up going outside to take the calls, which obviously allowed them backstage. So now they're looking for. Now, whatever this thing could have been to cut, that would have been able to cut the rope. And Jane is snooping around, and she goes to this pipe and was like, I know where the weapon is. So she opens the pipe, and it's the knife. How she was able to out all that shit that was backstage is another So how Beth knew that girl was pregnant, okay, that's a question mark. And how Jane just goes directly to this pipe to find this knife is also like, okay. Okay, so but in the end, they got the knife that we're assuming cut the rope. So Ursula's now being interviewed by Matilda, and she was asking him about the argument, and everybody named her and what was the argument about, and you know, the whole thing. And so Matilda, Ursula was like, you know what, I'd rather show you. So she ends up going to Sir Lawrence's dressing room, and showing like in his little stash, and you realize she was like, the issue with him was that because she didn't. At this point, you're speculating based on the conversation that the argument they had that had something to do with Zoe, but that's not what she told Matilda. She told Matilda that the argument was about Lawrence didn't want to deal with the fact that he was getting older. He had a problem with hearing and seeing. He would miss his marks. He was having issues, and she was like, the argument came when she told him he needed to wear his glasses. So as she was, finishing up with Ursula, her aunt wrote in this, basically said they found the murder weapon, so they ended up giving her the murder weapon. So the next day, they're sitting down for breakfast, and of course, the Inspector Thorne calls her and was asking about the murder weapon and how he know that the aunts found it and gave it to her, and he's trying to figure out like what did they compromise it in any way or whatever the case may be. Of course, Matilda's like no, they know better, they would never do that, and the whole thing. And he's basically saying he's going to be out again. She was like playing golf again, and he was like yeah. So Matilda ends up going back to the theater, and of course she took her Aunt Jane with her. So Beth and Kat are still sitting having breakfast, and they saw that morning's paper, and Quentin's article came out, and it basically trashed the play. So it's like, okay, wait a minute. Well, what she saw was like it was going to be a rave, right? But now they're saying no, his opinion of the show changed. I guess it changed. They're back at the theater. Everybody is in the kitchen. Amy is really upset, and they're trying to figure out, this is Matilda and Jane. They're now there, and they're trying to figure out, okay, well, what's going on? What happened? They've all read Quentin's article, and he said something about Amy being as talented as a cricket bat or something crazy. And he said something about Ian, how his body language is so terrible that he'd hate to hear him actually speak. Right? So. Okay, people are pissed off. So Amy storms out. She goes to the prop room, and she actually grabs a cricket bat. Okay. So Beth and Kat, they're upset because not really upset but confused because again, like I thought what they thought was that he was going to write a positive article, and so they decide that this article, and they're trying to make the connection between this bad article and the bribe, and they decide that they need to go and see what's going on with him and what's what. And so they end up going to his house, but of course they didn't walk up to the door. They stayed in the car and kind of waited for him to leave. So Matilda was now she's there now talking to Dame Blanche, and she talked about, she asked her about the divorces and the whole thing, and Dame Blanche was like, well, there were plenty of times where we hated each other, but I think deep down we still had an affinity for each other. And she basically said that she had to, get back to replying to her fan mail or whatever. And so Matilda noticed that the handwriting was similar, and it came from it wasn't the handwriting, it came from the same postal code or something. So she thought that was odd. So while she was sitting there talking as she was about to leave, she got a call from Beth saying that she needed to get to Quentin's house. And you can hear all this commotion going on in the background. Amy had already got there with the cricket bat, and she was going to town on Quentin's car. So he comes out the house, and he's trying to get her to stop, obviously damaging his car. And she didn't want to hear none of that. She didn't want to hear nothing he had to say about nothing. So Jane, she's in the kitchen, and she finds the pill that dropped when Fiona was about to throw the bottle in the trash. And then she goes into the trash, and she found the bottle. So now she's a scientist, okay? So now she finds some chemistry set that her parents gave her when she was a kid, and somehow it still works. And she decides to do an experiment to try to find out what this pill is, okay? Because Fiona had torn the label off, so she knew that it belonged to Fiona, but she didn't know what the medication was, right? So Quentin is calling for a car. Matilda has already gotten the cricket bat from Amy, and she's put Amy in the backseat of the car. And Matilda's now in the car talking to Amy, like, if he decides, your uncle is coming to get you, but if he decides to press charges, like, you're going to have to be arrested, the whole thing. And she started asking her about Sir Lawrence, and she was like, Sir Lawrence was a pig. He was an asshole. But the thing is, even though she didn't care for him, it was still good for her career to work alongside him. So it wouldn't have been to her benefit to do him in. So Terry calls. Her Aunt Jane calls to say that she needs her to come to the bookstore. So she's showing her how she got this chemistry set out. She did this experiment, and she found out that the pill contained lithium. So Terry ends up calling her and says that he found out that one of the people at the theater has a criminal record, and it's Fiona. So now she's talking to Fiona, trying to find out, okay, so girl, what happened back then? And so Fiona had some type of episode. She had a violent episode, whatever, and it prompted them to do tests. This happened years ago, and they found out she was bipolar, and so she was prescribed this lithium, obviously, as a mood stabilizer. And she talked about her Aunt Beth. She was like, well, why did you throw the medication away? And she was like, well, it started with your Aunt Beth. And she talked about the whole thing about her telling her about the caffeine limits for pregnancy. And she said she ran out and got a pregnancy test and found out she was pregnant. She told the daddy. The daddy was like, he didn't want to be bothered with being a father at his age, and that he didn't want anything to do with the kid. He wanted her to terminate the pregnancy. So of course Matilda was like, okay, the father was Sir Lawrence, this crotchety old bastard. Okay, so that's who he was laid up with, child. Anywho, but she was like, Fiona was like, he comes across as gruff, but he really is a nice person. Yeah, that nice person got knocked you up and then told you to go have an abortion, hunty. But anyway, the story, and then she started talking about, because she came off the medication so soon, all she remember is that she was backstage and she blacked out, which is why the smoke got so out of control, because she wasn't able to control it because she was unconscious for a while. Then she saw that her utility knife was on the table, and she heard all the commotion, and she hid the knife because of the criminal record, and she just didn't want they would automatically assume that she had something to do with it. After the interview, so basically that's why she stopped taking the medication when she found out she was pregnant, because she didn't want the medication to hurt the baby. So she ends up she started asking her, what's the last thing you remember before you blacked out? And she remembered when she got that cup of tea, when they were in there talking about, when the sisters were in there talking, and Dame Blanche called her over to talk about the lighting. That was the last thing she remembered. So Quentin is, the Beth and Kat are still sitting outside his house. So the tow truck finally came. He gave them the keys so they could take the car. The taxi came. They took him because he had another appointment he had to get to. So as he left, they went on and broke into his house, right? So now Matilda's talking to Inspector Thorne, saying that he doesn't believe that he told him the story of that Fiona told her, and she doesn't believe that Fiona's responsible. But he was like, well, at this point everything points to her, and you're gonna have to find something that contradicts that if we're going to let her go. So they get into Quentin's house, and then they pull this purple curtain back. Purple. Everything's purple, right? And so then next thing you know, they call Matilda. Of course, so Matilda get there, and now she's like, okay, broke into his house. We need to get out of here before they find out, because we don't have a warrant. So basically, I'm gonna lose my job. All I ass is gonna end up in jail for breaking and entering, right? And so they said, no, there's some things that you need to see. So she ends up pulling the curtain back, and there is a shrine to Dame Blanche. Okay, so they're like, okay, that's odd. And then Beth found these fan letters. So that's why, the fan letters were coming from the same postal code. He was using different handwriting, but all her fan letters that she claimed these fans she had was Quentin. And then they saw a photo of Dame, Blanche, and Quentin. Apparently, they too had been married before. Okay, so now they need to find Quentin to find out, okay, what is the nature of your relationship? What is this all about? So Quentin gets to the theater. He's clearly there to meet someone. He's under the stage, and he's like, well, this is an odd place to, for somebody to want to meet. And next thing you know, he gets stabbed. He gets poked up. He gets stabbed up. Okay. So while this is going on under the stage, on the stage, rehearsal number 5 is going on with Ian as the stand-in. He is terrible. Like, he is overacting. It's just, Ursula is not happy. She's like, okay, this is some crap, but whatever the case, whatever. So he said his lines. They're waiting for Amy to come out. Amy missed her mark. Amy is nowhere to be found. They have to take another break. Ursula is now going to look for Amy. Ursula's going to look for Amy. Matilda, Beth, and Jane arrive. And then the next thing you see Dame Blanche. Dame Blanche she was standing behind some glass, and it kind of went black. And next thing you know, Quentin pops out the ground, out from under the stage like whack-a-mole. Like they have like a drop door or whatever that kind of door is. That opens, and Quentin pops up, dead to the world. And so now they're sitting there like, okay, what the hell is going on? Okay, so Matilda was already there, obviously, and so they had to wait for the doctor to arrive. And of course, she was expecting Dr. Dreamy, aka Dr. Lynch. But Dr. Lynch was busy, or, whatever that situation was. So they ended up sending Dr. Young. Dr. Young is Dr. Lynch's, she introduced herself as Dr. Lynch's fiance. So, of course, Matilda, she wasn't happy to see her at all. But, it was determined that it was the first stab wound that killed him. And the second stab wound was just there for decorative purposes. It was actually there to stick the paper to him, because there was that newspaper, the recent paper that was stabbed, that was stuck to him. And so she was like, they talked a little bit, and she was like, it's Megan, right? So she's still playing this game like she don't know Matilda's name. Girl. So, of course, Matilda just made the face like, girl, you know who I am. Don't stop playing with me. Stop playing with me. So, Dame is now Matilda's now talking to Dame again. She was like, Lord, this is my second husband who has died, and, this is crazy. And, of course, Matilda, she wanted to know, too, like, okay, well, what's up? You done buried 2 husbands in the space of a week, honey. What's going on here? And so Kenneth walks in, and of course he's talking about the play and how Amy is nowhere to be found. They can't find Amy. And so he ends up asking Dame asking Dame Blanche to step into Amy's role. And of course, she's like, well, that's, I'm, older. She's a mature woman. And that's a role for a young woman. And she was like, no, I don't really think that I could do that. And, he basically begged her to step into the role. And of course, eventually she conceded. It was like, okay, she would do it. So, now they have her to fill in for Amy. So Matilda's aunts, they're at the bar and they're going over some of the stuff. And Beth was like, I wonder what happened to Quentin's notebook. And Amy was like, I wonder what happened to Amy. And Kat was like, I wonder what happened to Amy. And so Jane was like, you know what, Matilda asked us to stay out of it. I think that we should. And Jane ended up having to go back to the bar to get something. And it was agreed that Beth would go and find the book. Kat would go and find Amy. Okay. So, somehow Beth was able to go undercover at the Wildmarsh. I mean, this is like this. It's probably like 2 or 3 people that work in this office, right? So how they didn't know who she was, this baffled me. But she was able to go undercover at this paper, and she didn't find anything. But she did find out where his car was taken. And so Kat, she was on the net and she found out that Amy's real name, she found Amy's real name. And so she started doing research on hotels in the area trying to find, her name is Joanna something. And so the next morning, Dr. Lynch came over to the bookstore where Matilda is staying with Fiona's toxicology report. And basically, the toxicology report shows that she was, in fact, drugged. And so, obviously, that lent more credence to her story that she, blacked out. Now, she thought it was because she had just abruptly stopped taking her medication. But, of course, it doesn't work, that quick. It's a process for that medication to build up in your system. And, of course, it's a process to bring you off, for you to come off of that medication. So it wouldn't have happened that quick. And so now, when they found out that she was in fact drugged. So while he was there, Terry called Matilda and said there's an issue at the theater. Zoe has locked herself in the prop room, and they need her to come to kind of diffuse the situation. And of course, Jane knows Zoe, so she goes as well. And so they're outside trying to figure out, okay, well, what happened? What's wrong? And eventually Ursula shows up and she tells them that, Zoe wants to be a writer. And, of course, she was a fan of Sir Lawrence, and he offered to mentor her or whatever the case may be. But then, like the scum that he is, she said he propositioned her and basically was like, I've done a lot for you and basically you owe me now. Now, luckily, he didn't get physical, so he didn't actually touch her, but he's still a cretin nonetheless. So, of course, Jane tells her that, she's read her work, that she's good, and that she shouldn't let something like this stop her. She should go and, become what it is that she wants to become, which is a writer. She has, she has the gift and she can make it happen. And so they gave her what she needed to come out and, get on what to get on. And so Ursula and Matilda are now talking. And so Matilda's like, okay, so that's what the argument was about. Because remember, she told her that she was talking to Sir Lawrence about him wearing his glasses, that he, was fighting against his age, that he was getting older, and he didn't want to deal with the fact that he was getting older. And so she's now, telling her, like, okay, so that's what the fight was really about. That, what he did to her sister, propositioned her sister like that. And she said, yeah, she made me promise not to say anything. And it was like, well, if he was so bad, why did you continue to work for him? She was like, well, nobody else would hire me. Now, they didn't go into what happened with her, but she did throw Ian under the bus, saying that Ian, nobody is an understudy for 8 years. So, now they're looking at Ian like, okay, well, maybe he was trying to knock him off so that he can finally get the spotlight. So, Beth realized that, Quentin's car was taken to Kat's auto body shop. Kat owns an auto body shop. So now she's there and she's kind of sneaking around and she finds the car. She's going through the car looking for his purple book. While she's doing that, Matilda and Jane pull up because while Matilda was at the theater, somebody had hit her car. And this car means a lot to her. This car belonged to her mother. Her aunts had actually restored the car. And, it's been Matilda's car ever since she started driving. It's been her first car. It's been her only car. And so, she took it to her aunt's body shop to repair it. Beth finds the book. And as she was getting out of Quentin's car, she found this newspaper, and the newspaper had the guy who was in the bar on the front, and she was like, I knew him from somewhere. So now we're back at the theater, and they're having another rehearsal. But of course, at this time, Dame Blanche is in the role of that Amy was playing, and she looked, girl, because Amy, her role, she had this like bright neon pink wig, colorful wig, green wig or something going on. And a woman of her age, it looked bless her heart, it looked ridiculous. But she's up there, you know, saying her part, and Ian is saying his part, and they're constantly having to feed him his lines because he doesn't know his lines. Matilda came in, and she said that she needed to speak with Ian. And so she's now, you know, talking to Ian, and he goes into why he was kind of stuck being Sir Lawrence's understudy. And he said that, you know, he was like one of the up and coming stars, and, you know, he let it go to his head and got involved with, you know, alcohol and drugs, and it got to the point where he had burned a lot of bridges, and that no one would hire him. And he said that, you know, he really didn't have a problem with, you know, Sir Lawrence could be intolerable, but the biggest gripe that he had with Sir Lawrence is that in all the 8 years that he was his understudy, he never allowed him to stand there for him, not one time. And he was like, it got to the point where I just stopped learning his lines, which you can see now why he's struggling. Like, he was like, well, you know, it's just going to be the same old. So, you know, that's why, you know, they're constantly having to feed him his lines, because he just didn't bother to learn them. And he was like, he made it a point to point that out. Like, if I was going to get rid of him, don't you think I would have made it a point to actually learn the damn role? Like, you see that I'm struggling out there, and, you know, it wasn't me. You know, it really wasn't me. So Kat has now come to, I guess, the last hotel on her list, and she goes in, and she asked for Amy, and there's nobody here by that name, and then she asked for her real name, Joanne something other, and they said, oh yeah. So now she was like, oh, what happened? She was posing as a delivery person, so she was like, oh, can you make sure that she get this package? And so, of course, you know, then she excused herself to go to the bathroom, and she just went on and politely went around the corner and pulled the damn fire alarm. So, of course, they would have to evacuate the hotel, and then she'd be able to get Amy, because there was no other way for her to find out Amy's room. They wouldn't give her that. They don't do that at the hotel. They don't just give out room numbers like that. So, as Amy was walking out, you know, she called her, and, you know, she started talking to her, and this is their first time hearing that Quentin was dead. She had no idea, because she'd been MIA for forever, and she's been held up at the hotel, because she was just so embarrassed that, you know, she was humiliated when Sir Lawrence told her that, you know, that the only reason she was hired was because your uncle told me that he wouldn't fund the daggone play if I didn't give you the job. So she's now, she was humiliated and embarrassed, and that's why she ran away. And so Kat convinced her to go back with her to the hotel. I mean, to the theater. And so while Amy went back to her room to gather up her stuff, Beth, I don't know what prompted her to look at this the go and search, but she end up going through the hotel, and she found out they have a workshop there going on, like building confidence and dating or something to that effect, right? And who did she see sat up there practice dating? Inspector Thorne sure did. And he was there, and he was sitting across. They had like a mannequin, and him basically talk. And so she thought she was too tickled, right? She was too tickled. So that's where he's been going on his quote unquote dating outing. You know, his tennis outings when he's been out of work. He's been doing this daggone workshop trying to build up his confidence, right? So Matilda and Fiona. Matilda is now, you know, giving Fiona the update on her test results, basically saying that you were in fact drugged. And she, you know, Fiona was, you know, happy to find out that it wasn't something that she did. And then she ends up saying that, you know, she talked to her doctor, and her doctor gave her Dr. Lynch prescribed her a safer medication. And while they were back there, Fiona actually saw, it was like this frame with this glass in it, and she was like, well, what is this doing here? So she moved it, and, you know, at the time, Matilda didn't think anything of it. So now they're doing another rehearsal. Ian is, of course, still crapping his lines, and they're just like, oh, Lord. You know, it seemed like things were looking up. Kenneth told Ursula, they were both sitting in the audience, that the play was sold out. And she, of course, she's like, oh, my God, it's sold out. And it seemed like things are turning up. And then there's like, okay, well, look, maybe not, because Ian is still struggling with his lines. And so that's when Amy and Kat came in, and Matilda, and she basically apologized for disappearing, and like she's back to resume her role, and you know they greeted her and welcomed her back, and Kat gave Matilda the she got the recording basically saying that Amy had been at that hotel the entire time, so she didn't have anything to do with Quentin's death. And so Beth actually came in with Quentin's purple book, and it, you know, talked about whatever that situation was with Kenneth and the developer. So she ends up having to talk to him, and basically he's saying that, you know, he struggled with that theater all this time, and you know he wanted to sell it, or you know he basically wanted to unload it, and because it's considered a landmark, it has a historical meaning because, you know, it's been there for over 100 years. They didn't want to set. The council was like, no. But what he did was he borrowed money to fix it up, and so he actually paid Quentin to write the terrible article because he wanted the play to fail, so that he, you know, will be a reason for him to sell. They're not able to recoup the money, and so they close it anyway, and he's able to sell it to the developer and get money. And you know, he started talking about, it's a shame, all the time I wanted to be a success, you know, and it didn't happen, and now that I don't, it seems like that's when everything is starting to happen for me. Well, ain't that how it goes? He's like, I want to fail, and now it just seems like I can't no matter what I do. So the next night is opening night, and Matilda, you know, her aunts are at the bookstore, and Matilda's kind of going over the evidence, and she was like, well, Matilda, it can't be Amy or Ian, because Ian was on stage, and Amy was already MIA. She was at the hotel the whole time. And so she said, what's the only other person? Dame? And it's like, Dame Blanche? Like, what? What's that? So now, you know, it's opening night. Everybody's going to the theater. You see the crowds are pouring in, and Matilda, she ends up, she was the last person to leave the bookshop. So while she was locking up, it was something about seeing her reflection in the glass of the bookstore that made her realize that, okay, now. Okay, so there's a plot afoot. So now she realized that Amy is in danger. And so she gets to the theater, and she ends up stopping Dame Blanche from shooting, because Dame Blanche is waiting in the wings. The play has started. Amy's on stage. Ian's on stage, and so Dame Blanche is in the wings with a damn crossbow, and she's about to shoot the shit out of Amy, but Matilda gets there just in time, knocks her down, the bow flies out of her hand. Of course, it discharges the arrow, and of course, it ends up going into an empty sink, thank God. And so, for her to be older, she was quite spry, honey. She was giving them a run for their money, for real. So, she's now running behind the stage and climbing and, you know, going up into the rafters and the whole thing, and Matilda's following her, and then the fight ensues, and honey, it turns into a whole kerfuffle, right? So she ends up jumping down, and now she got Matilda on one side, she got the aunts on the other side, she got Inspector Thorne and Terry on the other side. So she's now surrounded. She ain't going nowhere. So she decides that, you know what, if I'm going to go out, let me have my last, you know, hurrah, right? So she ends up giving this speech. Well, I mean, given under any other circumstance would be, okay, girl, I hear you, I feel you, but girl, you done killed. Okay. So she basically gives a speech, and basically the speech is about ageism. and how, you know, she's always been a force and she's always been talented. And it seemed like the mere fact that she got older, or she turned 40, suddenly people started treating her like her talent somehow, you know, went away with her youth or something. And she was like, I'm still the same person that sold out theaters. I'm still the same. I'm still that same woman who got all them awards and those accolades. And the fact that I got, you know, got older, you know, shouldn't have prevented me from continuing to work. And she, you know, that was basically her speech. And so, of course, once she did her little speech, her little thing, she got a little standing ovation. Of course, they took her into custody. Matilda starts going into what actually happened. Basically, Monsieur Lawrence's death was an accident. The thing is, the minute he pushed Amy out of the way, remember when the smoke was getting to her and he knocked her out the way, and he, you know, stood in where her mark was and started going on about delivering his lines and the whole thing. Well, that bag was meant for Amy. So how they had it set up was, Quentin was still in love with Dame Blanche. He was her first husband. She actually left him to marry Sir Lawrence. And so when they were in the kitchen, remember when Fiona went and got the tea, and then Dame Blanche called her over to talk about the lighting? That was to distract her so Quentin can put something in her drink, which is why she was knocked out in the back, so that he would be able to access the back. He was actually the one that cut the rope that dropped the bag that killed Sir Lawrence. But the thing is, he didn't know that Sir Lawrence was there because it was supposed to be Amy. He was waiting for a certain line or a certain point in the play where he knew Amy would be standing there, was supposed to be standing there, and that's when he was supposed to cut the line. And so Sir Lawrence's death was a complete accident. And so he felt so guilty that he was actually going to turn himself in, and he was going to take responsibility for the whole thing. But Dame Blanche thought that under pressure that he would crack and he would implicate her. So she did old Quentin in. And so, so she killed Quentin to keep him from potentially implicating her. And they started talking about how she did it. She used to be a magician's assistant, and that glass thing that Fiona saw in the back, she was using that to, I guess, to do something to reflect her image to make it seem like she was on stage. But what she was actually doing was pulling the lever that actually caused Quentin's body to pop up. So it looked like she was on stage. Of course, Ian was on stage, but they knew that Amy was MIA. So all of this was done to kind of implicate Amy, so that she can get Amy out of the way, so that she can be the star once again. That was the whole thing. So a bunch of foolery and a bunch of nonsense, honey. A bunch of foolery and a bunch of nonsense. So they then went on to, they solved the case. Matilda, I should say they, because their aunts helped too. They went on to solve the case. And so they then went on to set Matilda up on another blind date, honey. And she's like, oh God, okay. So now she went to her cat's auto body shop to pick up her car after Ollie did the repairs. And so she pulled off. Just as she pulled off, Ollie was running like, oh, I found this file in the door. But she was already gone. So later that night, he went up to Kat and said, I wanted to give you this because I found this in the panel of the door of Matilda's car when I had to take it off. It was this file. And she was like, oh, you know what? I'll give it to her. And so she sent him, told him to have a good night and good luck on your date or whatever the case may be, right? So she took the file and she locked it up. So Ollie is now at the restaurant. Matilda is showing up for this blind date. She saw Ollie. She's like, oh, okay, they did not. No, they did not. No, they did not. So Ollie, she's sitting there talking to Ollie. And Ollie was there for a date. But it wasn't with Matilda. Ollie's gay. So I guess she went to sit down with Ollie, and he's like, girl, not me. I'm pretty sure your Aunt Cat didn't tell you. I tell you I was your date. I know she didn't do that. And so she ended up, I think she felt like she was stood up or something to that effect. And as she was leaving, the camera panned over to Dr. Lynch. And so Dr. Lynch is sitting there by himself. The waitress comes over and said, oh, you waiting for Natasha, who's the girlfriend who thinks she's the fiance. And he said, oh, well, no, Natasha and I are taking a break. So he was actually there waiting on Matilda. But Matilda walked out. They never saw each other. So she missed the opportunity to get this file, I guess to find out about, that may have pointed her in direction to find out what happened to her mother. She missed the opportunity to have dinner with the guy that she's been swooning over, honey, all this time. Honey, all these misses, honey. And then something drew her to that workshop. Remember in the first story when she went to get those pictures that Lady Hildebread, I can't remember that damn woman's name. Now she claimed she sent off to have the frames refinished. Something drew her back there. But for some reason, she decided not to go in. And when they panned in, they saw her, they saw that whoever this person was, it was a man working in the shadows in this little shop doing whatever. There were photos of Matilda all over the wall. Like this person has been following her throughout her career. Let me see. Like he's been following her throughout her career. I don't know if I like this color. I don't know if I like this color. I don't know. And so that is pretty much how she ends up walking away and not going inside. So that is pretty much how this episode ends. Okay, so I had to change that lip. It was a bit too neutral. I like the color, but I think because my eyes are a little neutral, I wanted a bolder lip. So yeah. So this is the final look. So, I had fun creating this look. I am not a makeup artist. I'm not going to claim to be a makeup artist. I just play in makeup. And, it's fun. So, I am going to end this video here. Please comment, rate, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video.